Welcome back, everybody. We now have a submission from Horticulture New Zealand. Sarah Cameron and Vance Hodgson. Are you online?
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm not going to go over our evidence. I presume it's been read, so I'll just touch on horticulture in Northland and, of course, introduce myself. So my name is Sarah Cameron. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst for Horticulture New Zealand, and I have policy oversight for the Northland region. And Vance Hodgson is our planner, helping us with our planning responses to consultations in Northland. So the main crops grown in the far north are kiwi fruit, avocados and citrus. So kiwi fruit is more centred around the Kirikiri area, with avocado dotted around the 90 Mile Beach area and also Kirikiri. The Northland, sorry, I keep getting echoes. Is somebody talking or asking questions or?
No, we're all as quiet as church mice.
Okay, I'll just keep going then. The Northland avocado industry represents 30% of national avocado production and 43% of producing hectares. There's around 130 kiwi fruit growers in the Kirikiri area, and greenfield conversion to kiwi fruit orchard continues, with large-scale developments continuing around Kirikiri. The main citrus crops grown in the far north are lemons, mandarins and oranges, and 45% of the national crop for citrus for these types are grown in the far north. Also, there is emerging markets in raspberries and blueberries. They're relatively new but rapidly growing, along with nuts, olives and watermelon. In addition, the emerging tropical fruit market continues to grow, and there's a smattering of vegetables, but really the far north climate is better suited to fruit. So the crops grown have national significance, as well as export significance. And in our evidence, we seek a permitted activity status for clearance and earthworks for a response to unwanted organisms under the direction issued under the Biosecurity Act. So I'm just going to hand over now to Mr. Hodgson to go over his evidence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Yes, Vance Hodgson, planning consultant with Horticulture New Zealand. Yeah, again, I won't read my evidence on the understanding that's been read. And as you would have seen from my planning evidence, the submissions of Horticulture New Zealand relative to artificial crop protection structures and crop support structures have been considered relative to the Section 42A report and recommendations, and Horticulture New Zealand had endorsed the recommendations and the findings of the Section 42A report writer. I discussed those with Sarah, and the reasoning was welcome, really sound in terms of the officers' work there, and we thank them for that. So my evidence had focused, as Sarah's mentioned, on the biosecurity incursions of unwanted organisms, and enabling provisions and plans to provide a timely response to those types of incursions. It's a matter that we've been traversing through a number of plans around the country, yeah, the suggestions in the Section 42A is to introduce a new definition for pests, which points off to the Northland Regional Plan. The problem is that does not. That plan is, I guess, a plan in time, a static plan, whereas unwanted organisms are those things that turn up, obviously unwanted, unannounced, and there can be a variety of responses to those, and that can range from burning through to burial, and there are difficulties sometimes in transferring infected material to other sites for disposal, be it to cleanfills, landfills, or burning them in different locations. There's a number of examples, and probably the best known one would be PSA in terms of its infecting kiwifruit crops, particularly in the Bay of Plenty. So it was an unwanted organism, but it didn't meet the threshold to enable it to be declared a pest of such significance that there was an override, I suppose, of the Resource Management Act and district and regional planning rules around it. So it fell within what was deemed to be an unwanted organism, and so the responses were typically on orchard, under supervision and direction of officers warranted under the Biosecurity Act. So I've suggested some direct references into the rule to enable vegetation clearance and earthworks for those incursions. Another way of dealing with it could be to make a change to the definition of what is a pest under the proposed plan. But I was just mindful that we were early in proceedings, I suppose. I wasn't too sure how and where the word pest might be referenced as we move forward, particularly as we get into, I guess, the broader earthworks chapter and the rural zone rules as well when we end up there. So that's me. So yeah, happy to move into questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think your evidence, both pieces of evidence were very clear, and it was very interesting reading, particularly with regards to how you respond to these unwanted organisms. Reading the evidence, it just seemed that burial was the preferred method. Is that correct?
Sorry, Sarah, you want to go?
I think you're on mute there, Ms. Cameron.
Sorry about that.
Oh, hang on, no, you're back on mute again.
Oh my goodness, failing. Sorry. Third time. So it depends on the pathogen, and it depends on some criteria around like where it's located. If it would be located next to a school, would burial or burning be more appropriate? Probably burial instead of burning. Is it close to other sensitive areas like a native forest? Burning, obviously, the spores are dispersed throughout the air. So it does depend what kind of pathogen it is and where it is located, and that kind of determines whether it will be buried or taken away or burnt.
And so your concern is that if you were to bury a pathogen, you might run into the need to have an earthworks consent to dig the hole to put them in. Is that your primary concern?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think the district plan would control your ability to burn material. That might be a regional planning matter, but not a district matter. Would that be fair to say?
That's right. Yeah.
Correct, Commissioner. And that, from memory, is a permitted activity under the proposed Northern Regional Plan, February 2024.
Right. Okay. So your primary concern is the ability to undertake earthworks and in an emergency situation to bury an unwanted pest.
Correct, and vegetation clearance as well. Yeah.
And the clearance would be, yeah, right. But that would be fruit trees mostly, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, another example, actually, I don't want to pick on kiwifruit, but yeah, wildling kiwifruit is a good example. It's a pest that's listed in the regional plan as well. So, yeah. I
didn't know. We do get wildling kiwifruit. Wildling kiwifruit. Yeah?
Wildling kiwifruit, yes.
Okay, no, thank you. I mean, that seems pretty clear to me. I'll see if any of the other commissioners have any questions.
Yeah, hi, Barnes. Yeah, no, I think your material was set out pretty clearly for us. I was a little bit amused to read the one about the limiting the colour of cloth used in orchards and the like. And I recall on a personal observation passing through Motueka a couple of times and the red colour of the crop covers, which had quite an astounding impact on the landscape around Motueka. But yeah, I don't have any questions on that. I just think that's set out pretty clearly for us to consider. You give us the reasons, you give what you want, and we can work through that pretty well. Thanks. Thanks, Sarah.
Any questions? Yeah.
I need to say thank you, because you've got that overview, you're working nationwide on other district plans, and it's good to hear that you mentioned that today, that you've taken lessons from what you've done around the country to bring to us for our information, so thank you. Yeah.
No problem.
Okay, well, I don't think we have any further questions, unless council officers would like to respond to anything in the evidence while we've got them here.
No response.
It seemed to me that there was quite a high degree of agreement between the two of you.
And I think my recommendation around the definition of pest had inadvertently sort of missed off something that we weren't intended to capture, so they'll probably point that out.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, well, that's short and sweet, so thank you very much for your attendance.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so now we move on to our next submitter, which is the Pacific Ecologic. Vicky Fruit. Do we have you here, Ms. Fruit?
Yes.
Would you like to turn on your camera? We can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. Does that work?
Yes, there you are. Can you see and hear us?
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're in your hands.
Okay. I'll just point out some things from the evidence I provided. I'll take all the background information as read. So looking first of all at changes needed to address the exclusion of significant natural areas in the proposed Far North District Plan. And I guess what I would note is once those areas are not in the plan, then it does require some significant changes in that chapter to address that, and the Section 42A report has acknowledged that. And I'd just like to say that I prepared the Indigenous Biodiversity Guidance Note for the Quality Planning website, and that I analysed the relevant provisions which are more than Section 6C of the RMA. And so that was also Section 6A, natural character, and 7D, the intrinsic value of ecosystems. And of course, there's relevant policies in the NZCPS and the National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity, with the objective there being to maintain Indigenous biodiversity across Aotearoa, New Zealand, so that there's no more loss in Indigenous biodiversity after commencement of the policy, which was August 23. And I note that in 3.21 of the policy, there's a requirement for local authorities to include objectives, policies and methods in their plans to promote the restoration of Indigenous biodiversity through the reconstruction of areas, and that local authorities must consider providing incentives for restoration in priority areas. I've had a lot of experience over many years with planning approaches to Indigenous biodiversity, and I would note that the predominant view has been to favour SNAs. I know that from my experience, they don't always work that well when you've got an area with a large amount of private land and Maori land, which has native vegetation cover and therefore often Indigenous biodiversity values. In those cases, it can be better to focus on using a relatively low level trigger so that you do the assessment of ecological significance at the time that there is a proposal for vegetation clearance, wetland drainage, or earthworks or subdivision, given that often implies substantial extra development rights as a matter of course these days. And so at that time is when the assessment of significance is done. For this approach, however, to work effectively, the council does need to be able to access current satellite and aerial imagery, and have some way, either by itself or with others, of monitoring and detecting change. I'd note that in my experience, a number of developers tend to include clear first and ask later if they have to. There should be some degree of penalty associated with this approach, because as an ecologist, in some cases it can be quite hard to work out exactly what was there in terms of its quality once it's gone. As I also described in the Indigenous Biodiversity Guidance Note, effective biodiversity protection, maintenance and restoration requires incentives as well as regulatory tools. Now, I note that the council's decided to prepare a plan without non-regulatory methods, but given the importance of these to actually achieving biodiversity maintenance and restoration, I consider an exception should be made for this chapter and the coastal environment chapter. The guidance note includes a number of non-regulatory methods, and one option could be for council to hold a workshop with ecologists, planners, tangata whenua, and others to discuss options for non-regulatory tools that would work specifically in the far north. And they could be in association with NRC, which also has some role in this regard, particularly for funding pest and animal pest control. My overall view is, given the magnitude and scope of the proposed changes from the Section 42A report, that it would be appropriate for council to either prepare a plan variation or others to consider before the review of the plan has gone through its processes, or a second option, which would be a lower level of work required, which would be to circulate a revised chapter to all those that made submissions for the expert ecologists and planners to discuss, maybe by expert conferencing, prior to another hearing in a few months' time. And this would not be inconsistent with the legal advice, which says you can deal with the rest of the Indigenous biodiversity policy statement that doesn't involve SNAs. I just want to address a couple of specific provisions. One is Rule in IB R1 PER 1-6, which makes it a permitted activity to create or maintain a 20-metre setback from a building used for a vulnerable activity to the edge of the Indigenous vegetation area. I provide quite a lot of general background on this in the evidence, and I would note that based on the operative plan, I presume this is to nominally protect a building from fire and potentially reduce the risk of fire associated with that building. Now, that approach is valid when the vegetation has been repeatedly cleared and is dominated by high-risk flammable species like pampas, woolly nightshade, gorse, wattles and pines. But this is not native vegetation, but the provision seems to apply equally to high-quality native vegetation. And I have debated with planners and fence staff many times about reducing, in the operative plan, the 20-metre clearance zone, where the vegetation involved is of higher quality a more mature native vegetation. And I've also seen many examples where the cleared native vegetation is progressively replaced by more flammable vegetation with increasing levels of pest plants, with the end result being a flammable area with few, if any, native plants. And so my preference is that where there is more native vegetation, every effort should be made to locate outside the native vegetation. And if any area has to be cleared, it's minimised, and fire-resistant native species are required to be planted in that area. And of course, in places like Russell Peninsula, where you do have a high level of native vegetation or natural cover, then there obviously needs to be coordinated action between agencies to reduce fire risk. So I consider that the permitted activity clearance of Indigenous vegetation around vulnerable buildings should be reduced to 5 metres, and that there be the requirement to plant and maintain a non-flammable native vegetation buffer. And where pest plants like gorse, pampas, tobacco weed, pines predominate, then a 20-metre clearance or more should be permitted. And it would be helpful to provide visual as well as other documentary guidance to clarify native vegetation from other vegetation. And since the proposed district council does not include SNAs, the Indigenous vegetation clearance and associated land disturb allowances in Rule IB4 are confusing. And so I recommend that clearance be limited to 100 square metres per lot per year. Otherwise, it's a discretionary activity requiring a qualified ecologist's report. And again, helpful to provide more guidance on what is Indigenous vegetation. I've provided a few definitions. Moving on to the coastal environment. Again, as I mentioned earlier, non-regulatory methods should be included in that chapter to provide incentives for protecting Indigenous biodiversity in the coastal environment. The terrestrial coastal environment is often narrow and modified. It's also highly vulnerable to many changes brought about by climate change. And Pahutakawa are vulnerable to myrtle rust, and so their ongoing survival in their current form is not assured. In Northland coastal environment, there are groups of individual and small groups of trees, native trees this is, such as mature Putakawa, Kuriri and Kowhai, that are too small to be mapped at either the regional scale for natural character or the district level for potential SNAs. And so the question is how to handle that. When the Far North Council was developing its plan, I responded to an opportunity to increase, provide information on small groups of trees or individual trees for the Schedule 1 of notable trees. I was told by council staff that they had only a limited budget to look at a limited number of trees. And while I'm a qualified ecologist, the council was not prepared to accept my assessment of a notable tree. So most of the incomplete list I submitted at that time was not included in the schedule. And while there are still a few pest plants in schedule, I'm glad that there are now fewer than they started out with, although the schedule does contain a large number of non-native trees. I'd also note that it does actually include the odd small stand of native trees, such as 148 at the Grove Waipapa, which is a group of Kahikatea, Puriri and Totara. And this approach could certainly be appropriate for these small groups in the coastal environment. So again, just summarising, those two approaches one could do would be to have a rule requiring consent to significantly prune or fell mature putakawa, kuriri and kowhai, or expand Schedule 1 as I previously described. And just to clarify, I am discussing the schedules now because I will be away overseas at the time that council hearing addresses the schedules. So I'm just briefly looking at Schedules 7 and 8. This relates to the outstanding and high natural character. I assessed those for the regional policy statement in 2012. There's been a few changes in particularly Bay Islands, and in the far north around Haringa, there's been it was an issue where I assessed them at a certain quantitative score. There were no submissions opposing. When the council or commissioners heard or were dealing with submissions overall on the plan, they made a decision to slightly adjust the threshold for high natural character, which meant that a number of areas in the far north were cut out. So I have since found other information on those places which would allow those areas to meet the new threshold that the commissioners set. I would also note that in respect of Schedules 7 and 8, that there are some errors in some of the unique identifiers, and random dates are assigned rather than actually the correct numbers. And that's a bit random how it occurs, but it's in both schedules. So again, that would make it difficult for somebody to actually track down the earlier information about those sites. This was all I was going to present today, and so if you have any questions, I can answer those.
Okay, thank you very much for your evidence. Just confirming that you are an experienced ecologist, but this evidence is not as an independent expert, but more in a personal capacity. Is that correct?
I made the submission on behalf of the company I'm a director of.
Yes, but not as an expert ecologist. Is that correct?
Pardon?
But not as an expert ecologist.
Well, I am an expert ecologist, but so I made it on the basis of the expertise I have, which was in ecology and in environmental policy and ecology.
Yes, because in paragraph 6, I think we say technically this is not independent expert evidence, as I signed the submission for Pacific Ecologic Limited. However,
That's correct.
So that was just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, yes. So I did sign the submission,
Yes.
and that was why I said technically, because I signed the submission.
We need to know whether your expert is an independent expert or as someone who's an ecologist giving a submission on a plan.
I told you the situation, so I guess that's for you to decide.
Okay, thanks. I'm happy. In paragraph 21 of your statement, you talk about preparing that the council should prepare a variation. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what that variation would include if council were to do that.
Well, the variation option is a more sort of extensive work requirement, which would include a revised set of policies, objectives, policies, and methods, including non-regulatory methods. So in a sense, it fits the standard format, but as I said, with non-regulatory methods in that chapter and the coastal environment chapter, given the importance of non-regulatory methods to achieving outcomes relating to Indigenous biodiversity protection and restoration.
You refer to, and this might just be my own ignorance, non-flammable native vegetation. So that's a thing, that there are certain species which are considered to be what, fire resistant?
Well, very low flammability might be a better term. I guess you can burn anything given the right conditions. Yes, there are lists of plants that are high flammability, moderate flammability, and low flammability. And I certainly have worked quite a bit in that area over the years.
Can you give us an example of what, some of those species?
Of the low flammability?
Yes.
Yeah. Plants like Griselinea lucida, even Griselinea littoralis, ones that have quite big fleshy leaves, and they don't contain large levels of terpenes and other oils which can be more flammable and tend to make a fire get larger. So those types of plants are often very useful ones to use when you're trying to create a buffer.
No, thank you. I haven't got any further questions. I'll see if the other commissioners do though.
No.
I just have one question. In number 28 of your submission, it recognises the environment benefits subdivision section of the plan and how you support that as an alternative type of provision to protect and restore Indigenous biodiversity. So basically a tool to encourage people to preserve and enhance Indigenous biodiversity. And you've also talked about non-regulatory methods.
Yes.
What some examples of non-regulatory methods that that you have at hand, or that you can provide examples of?
Non-regulatory methods can include various types of incentives, rate relief, grants for undertaking different types of works that protect ecological values. They can include providing assistance and guidance to help people make better decisions on areas. So there's a raft of those types of options that can make a big difference. And I've found over the years of working that people do respond well to non-regulatory incentives in terms of, just how they view things overall. And even if it's not guaranteed they're going to get something, the fact that it's available can really make quite a difference to the overall attitude to how people view having Indigenous biodiversity and protecting and restoring it. It can become, if you like, more of an asset and less likely to be considered a liability.
Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you.
Just question of clarification from me, please. Did I hear you correctly say that you were involved in the Northland Regional Landscape Assessment Project where they identified outstanding natural character at a regional scale? Did I hear you say that?
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
So that's the outstanding and high natural character at a regional scale for the terrestrial coastal environment and a few limited areas in the coastal marine area.
Right, okay. Well, that's helpful because that's something that we're looking at. And there's a link in your document to a research study or something, and that link doesn't work, unfortunately.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I can provide Alicia with a new one. I thought I'd given the new link. Waikato has changed.
Yeah, it's just log in or something. So yeah, that'd be helpful to have that.
Yeah, no, I'll do that because when I checked it, that was the link, but I know they've been changing everything around with that stuff. So
Thank you. And then I just would like some clarification on the coastal environment protecting trees, Pohutakawa, and, are you talking about having some sort of general tree protection sort of clause in the coastal environment chapter that protects trees of a certain species? Is that right?
well, there was two options. One was using the schedule, and the other was using a general rule to protect mature trees in the coastal environment, those isolated ones that don't get caught in with natural character mapping or Indigenous biodiversity mapping because they're just too small, but they add such an important character and value to the coastal environment.
So at the moment, are those sort of trees not protected under
correct.
Under any plan?
Correct.
Okay. And the government brought in that directive that they're not allowed to have general, or I was only in urban areas.
It's urban areas.
Okay, so we can put that sort of thing in, but there's nothing in the plan at the moment.
Yeah,
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we use council officers to clarify that for us. Our understanding was section 76, 480D prevents council from a general tree protection rule in urban areas. But that's only for allotments up to whether they're serviced or 4,000 square metres and what have you. But trees can be protected in a rural environment.
That's my understanding.
Yes.
It's just restricted to urban allotments.
Now, okay, so it would only apply in urban environments as defined by section 76. You can protect stands of trees, can't you? Do they have to be individually identified, or can you refer to a geographic location like along the coast?
It's quite specific in urban areas how you have to identify them. Yes. Outside urban areas, you need to have some level of certainty around if it was a PA rule that you can't clear or significantly trim a certain tree. You want to have some certainty around what you're talking about. Like, does it need to be a certain size and does it need to be in the coastal environment? So it potentially gets quite problematic. And I guess introducing a rule like that at this stage of the process will also have some potential implications on property rights that have to be considered.
Yeah, I think the North Shore District, the former North Shore District Council tried to protect all of their Pohutakawas along the Takapuna frontage, but I think they failed in that it wasn't, they weren't referring to stands of trees, but rather than some other geographic location. I don't know whether that's still the case or not.
I'm not sure.
They would probably have to be mapped as stands, wouldn't they?
Yeah, so right through the chair. In the proposed district plan, we've moved away from that framework that you're talking about. I do believe in the operative district plan there is protection for the Pohutakawas along Cooper Beach.
Right.
But that was part of I believe a camping ground that got put into housing, and at that time they asked to protect that area, but we've moved away from that in the proposed district plan. Yes, you would probably ideally want to do like you do with notable tree, which might apply to more than one tree, spatially identified. Otherwise, it becomes very unwieldy and difficult to identify what you're trying to protect.
Yeah.
And narrow reference by legal parcel, right? Like, so you don't have to be there.
Yes.
Well, the challenge you get is some of this will be on
Large
Crown land, potentially not just private. So a lot of the times, if you're talking about like Pohutakawas, for example, they could be on the coastline. Are they on? We have a little legal road along our coastlines, which are acting like reserves. So you'd have to also be confident: is it on public land? Is it on private land? So there's a bit of work involved in that, unless it's clearly within private land.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's quite helpful. Yeah.
That's fine.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Brute, for your evidence and attendance today.
Thank you.
And you're saying that you can't be here for the scheduled hearing, but will you be providing more evidence?
I could before I left. Exactly.
Yeah. So you certainly have the ability to provide evidence that you could table for our consideration, even if you're not able to physically be here. So
Okay.
it might be something for you to consider.
And I should do that in respect of Schedule 1 as well for the trees?
If you've got a submission that relates
Yes,
to
I
that, then yes, you can do that.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think this was the final submission of the day. Good afternoon. You're Tony Michelle?
That's correct.
That's right, and you're with the New Zealand Agricultural Aviation Association.
That's correct.
I think you sort of gave the game away with the background to your presentation today. Is that your helicopter?
Yeah, believe it or not, that's not New Zealand. That's actually South Georgia Island in the South Atlantic.
Okay, well, we have read your evidence, but you're welcome to take us through it again, or you could summarise it for us. We're in your hands.
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. I'm not going to read through the whole statement, but there is a couple of things that I would like to highlight. In 2.3 of our statement, the Section 42A report that recommends a new definition be included for pest, pest meaning an organism specified as a pest in the current Northern Pest Management Plan. We'd just like to point out that not all pests, plant pests and pest animals will be identified in the Northern Pest Management Plan. Therefore, the definition is limiting. And a couple of examples of that is currently Northland has incursions of Chilean needlegrass and climbing asparagus, which aren't included in the plan. 2.7, the submission of Hort New Zealand sought that IB Policy 7 be amended to include the word including. The submission point specifically used the word including so that pest plants and pest animals weren't limited to only those in the Northern Pest Management Plan. The Biosecurity Act sets criteria for selection of specified pests in a regional pest management plan as priority pests to be addressed at a regional level. It has prerequisite criteria that may be met to justify such an intervention. Non-inclusion of the Northland Pest Management Plan does not mean that a pest plant or a pest animal is not important at a district level. Therefore, we don't support the recommendation of the addition of a definition for pest as per paragraph 224 of the 42A report, and we seek to, if a definition is to be sought, it should align with the change to the policy as sought by Hort New Zealand. So happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you very much. It seems to me that your evidence is quite closely aligned with Horticulture New Zealand evidence. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think your evidence is quite clear, what you've set out. So I haven't got any further questions for you, but I'll see if the other commissioners do.
No, thanks, it's very clear, thank you.
Perhaps before you go, we might just see if the council officers want to respond to their suggestions.
As from 4.0, I think I pointed out that my recommended definition of pest, which is trying to provide a bit more clarity and certainty around that clause around removal of pests is too limiting. So when we amend that through the changes requested to the policy or the definition itself, I think we'll address that for our reply notes if that's okay.
Okay, well, we haven't got any further questions for you. So this is a bit short and sweet, but as I say, we've pre-read your evidence and we understood it. So thank you very much for making the effort to be here today.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm pleased I could shorten it up for you at the end of the day.
Okay, thanks very much. Take care.
Okay, cheers.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, takes us to the end of today's hearing. So we'll be adjourning now till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I think our first up submitter is the New Zealand Forest and Bird Association.
Correct. Stopping recording.
We are now adjourned.